never mess with a good person. Because when a good person turns bad, they can become the father of 100 bad people. Today, such a good person destroyed an entire Russian mafia. But before we start the story, please subscribe to my channel. The story begins with a man named Bob, who was living a simple and routine life. Every morning, he would wake up, get ready, have his meal, and head out for work. He worked as a delivery man at a factory. Bob was a calm, cheerful, and solitary person. He had no family. One day, after finishing work, during lunch, he met a young man named Rafi. Rafi came to Bob seeking training because he wanted to become a security guard at the factory. But since he was overweight, Bob advised him to focus on losing weight first. After finishing his work for the day, Bob returned home, had his meal, cleaned up the dishes, and started reading a book. However, he didn't feel comfortable staying at home, so he wrapped a tea bag in his handkerchief, took a book, and went to a nearby restaurant. Bob used to visit this restaurant every night to read books. Today, as he was reading, a girl named Annie, who often sat nearby, asked him, "What book are you reading today? When will you finish it?" Annie often saw Bob reading different books every day, and out of curiosity, she asked. Bob smiled and replied, "Don't worry, once I finish the book, I'll tell you all about it." Annie was a talented singer, and Bob promised her that if she ever released an album, he would buy the first copy. After their conversation, Annie left for the night. The next day at the factory, Bob's colleagues curiously asked him, "Hey Bob, what did you do before this job?" Bob smiled and replied that he used to be a pip dancer, and he even showed them some moves. That night, as Bob was once again reading at the restaurant, Annie entered, looking exhausted. She asked if he had finished the book, but Bob replied that it was a long book and would take a few more days. During their conversation, Annie received a call from someone who instructed her to visit a customer. She was unwilling to go, but the caller threatened her, leaving her with no choice but to leave with a heavy-set man waiting outside the restaurant. Bob observed the whole situation and realized that Annie was involved in prostitution. The next day, Bob went back to work and continued training Rafi on losing weight. Later that night, he visited the restaurant and saw Annie again, but this time she appeared injured and distressed. Despite trying to act normal, her face showed signs of exhaustion. Bob offered her a slice of his friend's birthday cake. For the first time, Annie sat at Bob's table and, in a disappointed tone, said, "I've met many guys, but you're different. You tell me little stories every day. You read books every day. Don't you have anyone to spend time with?" Bob calmly replied, "No, my wife passed away a long time ago. She had a wish to finish reading 100 books before she died, but she could only finish 97. So I decided to fulfill her wish by reading all 100 books in her memory." Hearing this, Annie shared, "I've fulfilled one of my dreams too. I've recorded some songs. Will you listen and tell me how they sound?" Bob assured her, "I'm sure your songs are beautiful. If you focus only on your singing, one day you'll become a great singer." However, Annie replied, "In my world, becoming a singer is impossible." Bob advised, "Then leave this world behind." After finishing their conversation, the two of them walked home while chatting. However, on the way, suddenly a group of men appeared to capture Annie. They shouted at her, "How dare you act like that with a customer?" Annie helplessly replied, "What could I do? That customer was beating me." Hearing this, one of the men started beating Annie right in the middle of the street. Bob stood there stunned, watching everything. The man handed Bob a card and said, "This girl is of no use to you, uncle. If you need another girl, call this number and I'll send one for you." After this incident, even though Bob visited the restaurant every day, Annie never showed up again. Eventually, Bob learned from the restaurant owner that Annie had been brutally beaten and was admitted to the ICU. Upon hearing this, Bob rushed to the hospital to see Annie. He saw that she had been beaten severely. However, instead of going to Annie directly, Bob sat on a bench inside the hospital and waited. Soon, one of Annie's friends arrived. Bob asked her, "How is Annie? What happened to her?" The girl was initially scared, but then said, "Don't worry, I'm Annie's close friend." Then, bursting into tears, she explained, "One day, Annie was forced to go to work. That day, the customer brutally assaulted her, so Annie fought back and hit him. But the customer reported it to Slavi. Slavi was the biggest agent in the area. Hearing the complaint, he severely beat Annie. He had previously burned a girl's face with fire to ensure the rest of us obeyed him out of fear. Their rule is simple: keep your mouth shut and do the work. No objections allowed. The girl continued. Poor Annie. Slavi took her from an orphanage when she was a child. As she grew up, she thought she could shape her life the way she wanted. But Slavi made sure she understood that day would never come. The scene then shifts to a nightclub, where Slavi was enjoying himself in a private room with his partners. Just then, Bob walked in. Bob directly showed Slavi his card and said, I want the girl named Annie. Slavi laughed and replied, Annie is no longer available. You can take someone else. But Bob firmly said, I'm not here for just one night. I want to take her forever. I know these girls are like investments to you, so I've brought $600,000. Take it and let Annie go. Slavi laughed mockingly and said, Do you really think you can buy Annie from me for just $600,000? That girl earns me that much every week. Take your money and leave. Bob calmly took the money and pretended to leave. But when he reached the door, he locked it from the inside and turned around. He quickly analyzed the weapons in everyone's hands. He realized it would take him only 16 seconds to take down all of them. Without warning, Bob launched a sudden attack and swiftly took out everyone in the room. No one could stop him. Within just 29 seconds, he had eliminated everyone and stood before an injured Slavi. Bob said, You've been shot in the throat. Breathe slowly, because the faster you breathe, the faster you'll bleed out and die. You should have taken the $600,000. Now look, Annie, the girl you tried to kill, will still live her life the way she wants. But you? Your life ends here tonight. Before dying, Slavi could only ask, Who are you? But Bob didn't answer. He returned home, washed off all the blood from his body, and quietly resumed his normal life. The next day, he went back to work as if nothing had happened. Later, on the news, reporters stated that 5 people were killed in a gang conflict at a nightclub. But we know who actually killed them all, don't we? Meanwhile, after Slavi's death, a man arrives from Russia to investigate the matter. Sitting in a hotel, he looks at the pictures of the deceased and instructs the others. Start working from today. Give me all the CCTV footage from around the club, and keep your phones charged and switched on at all times, because I might call at any moment. Hearing this, a man named Master angrily says, Do you think we are your servants? Hearing this, Nicholas gets furious and says, Until now, all of you have been living off Mr. Pushkin's money. Now it's time to work for him. After Slavi's death, Mr. Pushkin's business has come to a halt, so we must find the killer as soon as possible and resume business from tomorrow. Meanwhile, Bob came to meet Rafi because he didn't show up for training today. Bob found out that a fire had broken out at Rafi's mother's small food shop the previous day, burning everything down. So, Rafi was busy helping his mother rebuild the shop. On the other hand, Nicholas and his gang met with an Irish mafia group, their main competitors. The Irish leader said, We Irish came to America to do business, but you Russians have turned it into a syndicate. Nicholas responded, We'll talk about that later. Tell me who killed Slavi, or I'll kill you. The Irish leader replied, I don't know anything about Slavi. We didn't kill him, but how dare you come into my place and threaten me? Then, he ordered his men to kill Nicholas. But Nicholas was so swift that he immediately attacked and brutally killed the Irish leader. Meanwhile, Bob told Rafi, Your security guard exam is coming up soon. If you don't train now, you won't get the job. Rafi, feeling disheartened, said, I don't think I'll pass the test. I'm too overweight. Right now, helping my mother is my priority. Bob encouraged him. At least take the exam. If you get the job, you can still help your mother after your duty. Elsewhere, Nicholas interrogated a girl named Jenny about Slavi, but she claimed to know nothing. Later that night, Mr. Pushkin called Nicholas and said, Solve this matter as soon as possible, Nicholas. My business is suffering. Nicholas assured him, Don't worry, I'll handle everything. Nicholas called Jenny again and said, I know you were Annie's closest friend, and she has been missing for a few days. Do you know where she is? Did you notice anything strange? Terrified, Jenny replied, I don't know anything. But Nicholas had already learned that Jenny had spoken to someone at the hospital for a long time that day. When asked, Jenny admitted, Yes, a man came to ask about Annie. He said he was a close friend of hers. Nicholas asked for the man's name and address, but Jenny knew nothing. Furious, Nicholas strangled Jenny to death, believing she was hiding information about the unknown man. Meanwhile, Bob was playing baseball with his colleagues, and everything in his life seemed normal. Raffi, following Bob's advice, took the exam and successfully got the job as a security guard at the company. But Nicholas, during his investigation, discovered an important piece of information. He found a video showing Bob entering the club before Slavi's murder, but he was never seen leaving through the door. Nicholas suspected that Bob might have killed Slavi and escaped through another exit. That night, while Bob was sitting at home, Nicholas arrived at his doorstep. Introducing himself, he said, "I'm a police officer. I'm here to question you about the recent murders at the club. Why were you at the club that night?" Bob calmly replied, "A friend invited me, but he couldn't make it." Then Nicholas showed him a picture of Jenny and asked, "Do you know this girl?" Although Bob had spoken to her at the hospital, he replied, "I don't know her." Hearing Nicholas's words, Bob realizes that this man is not a police officer. He starts observing through the window and understands that this man is one of Slavi's gang members. Meanwhile, Nicholas also figured out that Bob was lying. From the next day, Nicholas started keeping a close watch on Bob. In response, Bob began modifying some surveillance cameras in preparation for the future. Nicholas gathered all available information about Bob and found that he was a graduate, worked at Walmart's warehouse throughout the week, and had normal bank statements and tax returns. However, Nicholas was convinced that everything was fake. He instructed his men, "Bring Bob to a place where there are no cameras, no people, just me. I need to find out who he really is and whom he works for. He doesn't seem like an ordinary man to me." That night, while Bob was sitting in the restaurant, one of Nicholas's men held him at gunpoint and tried to force him into a car. However, in the blink of an eye, Bob killed the man, turned off all the restaurant lights, and quietly escaped while taking several pictures of Nicholas. Since there were many surveillance cameras in the area, Nicholas remained calm and sent his men after Bob. But once again, Bob managed to take down a few of them and escape. In the process, Bob injured his leg and bandaged the wound later. However, by then, Nicholas and his gang had arrived at Bob's house. They searched the entire place but couldn't find him. Bob had already relocated to another house and was monitoring Nicholas through his modified surveillance cameras. The next day, Bob met his old friend Rosie. Rosie called him Robert, and we learned that they used to work for an agency together, though they had all retired. Bob asked Rosie for information about Nicholas. Rosie asked, "Why?" Bob calmly replied, "Because I've taken out one of their groups." The following day, Rosie, after finishing her work, provided all the information Bob needed about Nicholas. Rosie explained, "Nicholas is the closest associate of Russian mafia boss Pushkin. Pushkin runs the Russian mafia globally. He supplies black money, oil, and women across the world. Nicholas is the man who eliminates all of Pushkin's enemies." In his youth, Nicholas was a commando in Russia's most dangerous military unit, Spetsnaz. Later, he disappeared and joined hands with Pushkin. Pushkin has a strong influence in 2 coastal areas of America. Due to his political connections, he remains untouchable by the police. Moreover, Nicholas is currently receiving direct assistance from a Boston police officer named Master. And you, by killing their men, have disrupted Pushkin's entire network. They won't stop until they kill you. Frustrated, Rosie asked, "So, you did all of this just to save that girl?" Bob smiled and said, "You're right. I can't stand to see innocent people suffer anymore. I just want to help them." Later, to bring Nicholas down, Bob targeted Master, the corrupt police officer helping him. Bob killed Master and locked his body inside his own car. Bob then released toxic gas inside the car and asked Master, "Who is Pushkin? What does he do in America? Where does he operate? Tell me everything." However, Master refused to talk, fearing that Pushkin would kill his entire family. But Bob gave him only one choice: either talk or die. In the end, Master was forced to reveal everything: Pushkin's black money operations, human trafficking, and oil smuggling. The next day, Bob took Master to Pushkin's black money distribution office, where millions of dollars were transacted and stored daily. Upon arriving, Bob introduced himself as Pushkin's new recruit. However, Andre became suspicious of Bob and pointed a gun at him. But in a split second, Bob disarmed him and took everyone hostage, locking them inside a room. Afterward, Bob used a portion of the millions of dollars to pay the female workers their entire year's salary and sent them away. He then shut down the factory permanently. Later, Bob handcuffed Master again and asked him to hand over all the evidence he had against Pushkin. However, Master was too scared to cooperate because of Pushkin's influence. Bob told him, "Your death is near. Do you want to die as a traitor, or do you want to die as a hero by helping the police? I promise if you cooperate and give me all the evidence, I will save you." After much thought, Master decided to side with the police. He called them and informed them to come and seize the black money from the factory. He also revealed the location of a bank locker that contained all the information about Pushkin's illegal businesses. Bob seized the evidence, and soon the police arrived at the scene, confiscating all the black money and arresting Master. Bob cleverly framed Master and got him sent to jail, believing it to be the safest place for him. That night, Nicholas received the shocking news that billions of dollars had been seized by the police. Enraged, he formed a new group to hunt Bob down. However, Bob preemptively killed the leader of the new group and confronted Nicholas face to face. Bob calmly said, "I won't stop. I'll hunt down every one of your men, and you'll just count the losses." Nicholas smirked and replied, "Killing a few of my men won't weaken me. You still don't know who I am, Bob." Bob then responded, "All right, let me remind you of something. Years ago in Russia, there was a social worker. Despite having 5 children of his own, he adopted an orphan and raised him as his own. However, as the boy grew up, he got involved in theft and robbery. But the kind-hearted man always forgave him. One day, the boy severely injured others in a fight, bringing great humiliation to the man. Yet, he forgave him again. But one day, robbers attacked his house and killed him. The police closed the case, but I know the truth. The boy he adopted was the one who killed him. By then, the boy had become deeply involved in illegal activities and feared that if his father found out, he would throw him back onto the streets. So, to hide his crimes, he killed the only man who ever cared for him." Bob looked directly at Nicholas and said, "Do you remember this story, Nicholas? Because that adopted boy was you." Finally, Bob warned him, "If you want to live, tell your boss Pushkin to shut down all his operations starting tonight. I've given everyone a chance to walk away. Now I'm giving you 24 hours. Shut down the business and call me." Nicholas, unfazed, replied, "Your offer doesn't interest me." Bob realized that nothing would end unless Nicholas was eliminated. Back at his house, Bob found a pen drive containing all of Pushkin's illegal transactions and business records, which Officer Master had given him. He also discovered that a large shipment of Pushkin's oil had recently arrived via a tanker at the coastal area. Without wasting time, Bob sent all the information to an FBI agent and then headed to the coastal area himself. Upon arrival, Bob destroyed Pushkin's massive oil tanker along with all the stored oil reserves nearby. In the blink of an eye, a massive explosion wiped out nearly $600 million worth of Pushkin's oil. Upon hearing the news, Pushkin went completely mad. He called Nicholas and said, "Kill that man by today, or I will kill you." So, Nicholas went to Bob's factory and took all the workers hostage. He then called Bob and said, "If you want to save them, come to the factory, or I'll kill them all in 30 minutes. Nicholas prepared his sniper and instructed his men to stay ready. However, even after 30 minutes had passed, Bob didn't show up. They decided to kill one of the hostages. But just then, loud music started playing throughout the factory. Confused, they had no idea who turned it on. To find out, one of Nicholas's men took Raffi hostage and went to the control room. That's when Bob launched a surprise attack, killing the man. Bob then sent Raffi ahead and stealthily took down another of Nicholas's men. Using this opportunity, he instructed Raffi to escort all the hostages out through the factory's emergency exit. After that, Bob systematically shut down all the factory lights. Taking advantage of the darkness, Raffi managed to lead everyone out safely, while Bob continued to eliminate Nicholas's men one by one. Nicholas soon realized that the entire factory was nothing but a trap set by Bob. Suddenly, he spotted Bob and fired at him, forcing Bob to escape. However, Bob got shot in the hand. Even in his injured state, Bob didn't stop. He managed to kill 2 more of Nicholas's men. But as he fought on, he encountered the strongest member of Nicholas's group. A brutal fight broke out between them. Although Bob was severely injured, he finally managed to kill him. At that moment, Raffi arrived to rescue Bob. As they were about to escape, Nicholas shot Raffi, wounding him. Seeing this, Bob quickly devised a new plan. He sent Raffi to the control room to light up the entire factory. Since Bob had previously set up gas cylinders in the building, the moment one of Nicholas's men entered, the cylinder exploded, killing him instantly. Water started pouring from the fire suppression system throughout the factory. In the midst of all the chaos, Nicholas found Raffi and was about to shoot him. However, Bob attacked from behind, using a stapler to disable Nicholas completely. Before dying, Nicholas screamed, "Who are you?" Bob didn't say a word. He simply drove a nail into Nicholas's throat and killed him on the spot. The scene then shifts to Moscow, where Pushkin, the mafia leader, was taking a bath in his luxurious mansion. Suddenly, Bob appeared. Bob calmly said, "I just want to end all this chaos." Pushkin smirked and replied, "So, you've come to kill me? What will you gain by killing me? Instead, tell me what you want. I can give you anything you ask for." Bob simply said, "I want peace." Saying this, Bob walked out of the room. Moments later, due to a short circuit in the electrical system, Pushkin was electrocuted and died instantly. We see that Bob had already eliminated all of Pushkin's guards before entering the mansion. After finishing everything, Bob returned to his hometown, where Annie came to visit him. She had no idea how much Bob had done to save her. Annie had just released a new music album and had come to give Bob a copy. She said, "You know, Bob, after I was discharged from the hospital, I found $600,000 and a ticket to leave this city inside my bag. Whoever did it must be a really good person." Bob smiled and replied, "Yes, you're right. He's a really good person." With this, today's story comes to an end.